Something very strange is happening on Spotify. If you go on one of Spotify's curated playlists, for example Jazz in the Background, you'll notice that many of these artists have an incredibly high number of streams. There's tracks with millions of streams in some cases, but there's something very curious about this music. Practically none of the artists exist. What do I mean? Well, they don't appear to be real artists or real bands. They seem to be fake musicians. No evidence of them exists anywhere else online except for Spotify. What's going on here? Is there any truth to the accusation that this is Spotify's way of avoiding paying royalties to real musicians? Musicians who already complain that Spotify isn't paying them enough. Well, the issue isn't as clear-cut as it might seem. To understand the true story, we have to look at this phenomenon of fake artists and examine what evidence we have, what evidence we don't have, and what this could mean for the future of music. So what is a fake artist? Behind every track on Spotify, there's a real human musician recording the song. I mean, after all, someone has to record the music. It's not being made by artificial intelligence yet. The thing is, some of these artists go by pseudonyms or aliases. Often they can have several. In fact, according to one report, a group of just 20 or so people are responsible for over 500 artist names on Spotify. But where this gets very suspicious is why tracks by these artists appear again and again on Spotify's most popular playlists. I mean, these are musicians without any kind of following. Take Anna Olgica, for example. This is an artist with over 150,000 monthly listeners. Their most popular track has over 148 million listens. By all accounts, this seems to be a very popular artist. But when we scratch the surface, it leads to more questions than answers. When the online publication Medium did an extensive search into several of these so-called fake artists, including Anna Olgica, they came up with 3 very revealing pieces of information. Number 1, the artist was based out of Sweden. 2, the artist is associated with a label called Catfish Recording. And number 3, using the artist's composition copyright information, Medium traced Anna Olgica to 2 Swedish musicians, Bostrom Fredrik Hakan and Nordenström Jesper Olof. So why exactly did they choose to go behind pseudonyms? And is it a coincidence that both of these artists are based very close to Spotify's headquarters in Stockholm, Sweden? Well, according to Music Business Worldwide, who published an article revealing 50 of Spotify's fake artists, Spotify has been, quote, instructing producers to create tracks which fit in certain genres and themes, including jazz, chill, and peaceful piano playing. Why would Spotify ask for this? Well, it all comes down to money, or in this case, royalties. You see, normally Spotify has to pay a certain amount of royalties to artists based on how many streams they have. But by striking their own deals with music producers, Spotify may be offering lower payment options, which are much more favourable to them as a company, thereby incentivizing them to give these cheaper tracks much more exposure. The thing is, this actually impacts other legitimate artists across the entire platform. You see, royalties are calculated based on the number of streams an artist has, divided by the total number of streams on the platform. So, by adding hundreds of so-called fake artists to the platform, each with millions of streams, Spotify has essentially found a way to dilute the amount of royalty payments they give out. And this is where a company like Catfish Recording comes in. These are basically the factories where Spotify gets its musical talent. The most famous one of these factories is called Epidemic Sound. A very large percentage of artists at Epidemic Sound have actually ended up on Spotify's biggest playlists. Playlists like Jazz in the Background, Peaceful Piano, Deep Focus, the list goes on and on. Now, understandably, Epidemic Sound has drawn a lot of criticism from journalists and record labels alike, and again, it has to do with royalties. You see, normally when a musician has their music on Spotify pays royalties that come up to about 70%, and that money goes to whoever holds the rights to the music. Spotify retains the other 30%. But in the case of Epidemic Sound, Epidemic buys the complete rights to the musician's music and compensates them with a 50-50 split of the revenues generated by streams. Epidemic is able to use this kind of creative financing strategy because it makes each musician agree not to join any performance rights organisation, which are normally the ones collecting royalties on behalf of the songwriter. For Epidemic, this kind of pay structure saves them money. Once they control the rights to someone's music, they'll not only collect 50% of streaming revenue, but they're also free to use that music outside of streaming platforms. That includes on TV or on sites like YouTube. For those use cases, that's known as royalty-free music. In other words, music anyone can use as long as they have a license. No need for revenue share based on streaming numbers. Which leads to an interesting question. If Spotify are using music from Epidemic Sound, are they still paying royalties just like they would do to any other label? According to many music industry insiders, Spotify could very well be paying companies like Epidemic a reduced rate. So are fake artists a way for Spotify just to lower its licensing costs? Well, despite all of these allegations, there's no conclusive evidence that Spotify is striking any special deal with any of these companies. We haven't seen any contract with Epidemic, for example. In fact, Spotify even goes one step further. They deny that they have any fake artists at all on their platform. But before we come to any conclusion about what Spotify is up to, there's one last piece to this puzzle that adds to the already troubling set of circumstances going on, and that has to do with a little talked about venture capital firm called Creandum. Creandum has invested heavily in both Spotify and Epidemic Sound. In fact, they were the first major investor to back Spotify when it first started in 2008. As an investor behind both companies, Creandum has financial incentive for both Spotify and Epidemic Sound to be profitable. And when you look at the phenomenon of fake artists from their perspective, it starts to look like an ingenious way to maximise profit. How so? Well, Epidemic Sound purchases the full music rights from its musicians, giving it complete control of its distribution. That is something we do have clear evidence of. Then there's allegations that Spotify may be licensing music from Epidemic Sound at a reduced rate, but we don't have any proof of that. But there is evidence that Spotify requests that producers make specific kinds of tracks to add to their playlists. And then there's Soundtrack Your Brand. They're another one of Creandum's investments. Soundtrack Your Brand were actually founded by ex-Spotify employees. They have very close links with Spotify. And what does the company do? Well, they supply places like shopping malls, offices and restaurants with, you guessed it, music. Why is this important? Well, keep in mind Spotify is only for personal non-commercial use. If you own a shop and you want to be playing music, you need to have a Soundtrack Your Brand license. And with such close links to Spotify, it's probably no surprise to learn Soundtrack Your Brand license their music from Spotify. It's all very convenient, isn't it? Soundtrack Your Brand provides a ready supply of customers who pay to license those popular Spotify playlists where so many fake artists appear, all of which earns more money for their investors at Creandum. Now, to be clear, there is no evidence that anything illegal is going on between Spotify and the companies that it licenses music from, and both Spotify and Epidemic Sound deny any wrongdoing. The CEO of Epidemic Sound defended his company's practices, saying they were, quote, democratizing A&R. That is, that they were making artists and the music that they create more readily available to everyone. And despite all of the clues that point to this being a money-saving scheme on Spotify's part, it's worth pointing out that the few millions of dollars that Spotify could potentially be gaining from paying out lower rates is relatively little compared to the billions of dollars that they generate in revenue each year. All in all, that's probably not enough of a saving to risk all the legal trouble that would come with it if these allegations could be proved. But wherever you stand on the issue of so-called fake artists, there is one last reason why these fake artists should be a cause for further investigation. You see, as I mentioned, at the moment, it's really just the pseudonyms that are fake. Musicians are still making the music and earning a living from the deals that they have in place with companies like Epidemic. But what happens when you replace human musicians with AI? If you're Spotify, that's the next logical step. After all, with AI, you can cut out the middleman altogether and save loads of money. Once you have the technology, you can simply have a computer create the music for you. No licensing fees and no composer rights to deal with. And that future may come faster than you expect. Spotify already have some pretty formidable AI know-how. Their current AI expert, yep, they've already recruited for that role, is very enthusiastic about what AI can do in the music industry and has even used machine learning technology to create some surprisingly catchy songs. For now, Spotify is creating playlists to reflect what it knows about you, but tomorrow it may be providing you with original music composed by machines. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, well, I'll leave that for you to decide. But whatever the case may be, this is not the end of the fake artist phenomenon. It's really just the beginning.